Thank you for joining us today as we show you how we render our wax cappings here at Mundrenidangi Estate. Today we'll be covering how we store wax cappings, small and large batch methods, final rendering, and cleanup. Let's start by talking about how we store our wax cappings. My preferred method is to store them sticky. That means they still have the honey on them. After we've harvested, we strain away the honey and store them in an airtight bucket. They'll save for a long time without going bad. The second method of storing wax cappings is to store them wet in rainwater after you wash them. The cappings don't store very long this method, so be sure to use it within 2 days, maximum a week. Okay, let's show you how we handle a small batch of wax cappings. We'll need our wax cappings, an extra bucket, and a nylon cone filter. It will take several washings to wash all the honey out of your cappings. We use rainwater when washing our cappings, as we found that city water with a chlorine in it does some strange things to the wax. After the first wash, we pour the water off through the nylon cone filter. You can see that the water is quite dirty with honey. In the second wash, we're really trying hard to break up the large bits of wax cappings to make sure that we get all the remaining honey out of the wax cappings. The last wash may be the third or the fourth wash. You can see now that the water is nice and clean and we're done with the washing. To melt our wax, we're going to need a pot, a basin, a strainer, a stir stick, some newspaper, wax cappings, and an oven mitt. Please note that the pot that you use should be an older pot, because once you've got wax on it, it's going to be your wax pot forever. We'll add wax cappings to the pot until the pot is about 3/4 full. We're going to add about 1.5 inches of water in the bottom of this pot, as wax should never be heated on a stove on a direct flame. Wax has a low combustion point, which means that it can catch fire. By adding water, you make sure that the temperature of the wax never exceeds 100 degrees centigrade. Once we've got water in the pot, we can turn on the stove and begin to melt the wax. It took about 20 minutes to melt this wax. We were able to add more wax cappings as the wax began to melt. A full basin of wax cappings ended up in this pot. Okay, so all the wax is now boiled. You can see that it's bubbling quite hard. That's the water that's in the pot that's bubbling out. It's important not to boil it so long that that water boils right off. At this point, we're scooping out the slum gum. The slum gum is the cocoons and other dirt that wasn't washed out when we washed the wax cappings. Scooping out the slum gum at this point will create a cleaner block of wax for the next stage of rendering. Before you pour your wax, make sure you have a basin, your strainer, and oven mitts ready. When pouring the wax through the strainer, make sure you take your time. It's hot, follow proper safety processes in your kitchen, and ensure that there are no children around you. "24 hours later or later in the day, as long as the block of wax is solid, you can turn it out into your sink. You can see that the water is still quite dirty. The underside of the cake will still have some debris, some slum gum on it. It is quite fine because we strained most of it out. We're going to wash as much of it off as we can. If the wax is still a bit warm, then the slum gum comes off a little bit easier and you can wash it almost right off. But if it's like this, over 24 hours later, we're going to have to take a knife to scrape some of that off. We'll try to scrape as much as we can off because it does turn into a much cleaner block of wax in the next stage, in the final stage of rendering, if we've done a good job at this stage. I like to mark my wax cakes so that I know whether the cake is wax cappings, honeycomb wax, or brood wax. Now let's take a look at how we render a large batch of wax cappings. To wash your cappings, you will need a bucket of cappings, a second bucket, and a nylon cone filter. Washing wax cappings for a large batch of wax cappings is the same as washing a small batch, just in larger amounts. Wash, pour off 2 or 3 times. To melt your large batch of wax cappings, you will need a large stock pot, which once you've used for wax will become a dedicated wax pot. You will also need some rainwater. Add your wax cappings to the stock pot until it's about 2/3 to 3/4 full. Add about 2 to 3 inches of water to your stock pot. Again, for safety reasons, never heat wax directly on the flame. Put the pot of wax cappings on the stove with the heat on medium. Be sure to check on it frequently to make sure that the water doesn't boil off. After it's melted, turn the heat off and let it sit there overnight. It's been 24 hours since we turned the stove off. The wax is now solid. We did not filter any of the slum gum out. You can see how much of it is on the bottom of this block. This is the cocoons and other dirt that was contained within the wax cappings. We're going to use some water to rinse most of the slum gum off, and then we're going to have to use a knife to cut as much off as we can. You can see that there's still quite a bit of debris on this block of wax. We're going to have to melt it again and put it through a strainer before we can do the final rendering. Again, please remember to mark the block of wax. The final rendering process will give us a nice clean block of wax that we can use for value-added products, particularly body care products. The first step to the final rendering process is to chop your block of wax up. You will need a chopper, a cutting board, and your wax block. Chop your block of wax into small pieces. Small pieces melt much faster than larger pieces. To melt your wax in a double boiler, you will need a pot, a stainless steel bowl, oven mitts, and a wooden stir stick. Place about 1.5 inches of water in the bottom of the pot. And then we're going to add a stainless steel bowl on top of that pot. This creates a double boiler. Next, we'll add the wax to the bowl. Once we have the wax in the pot, we can turn the stove on. The water in the bottom pot will heat up to a boiling point, which creates the right temperature range for our wax to melt. It won't get any hotter than 100 degrees, which is within a safe range for the wax. Be careful that you don't let the water in the bottom pot dry out, or else the temperature will get too hot for the wax. Once the wax is melted, it's time to filter the wax. You will need a pouring pot, filter cloth, clothes pegs, oven mitt, and towel. Once the wax is melted, lift the bowl off the pot, dry the bottom off, and pour the wax through a double layer of filter cloths. The filter cloths are just a sheer curtain material that was purchased at a sewing store in Suva. You can see that the clothes pegs hold the filter cloth in place over the pouring pot. You will see as we get down to the bottom of the bowl that there's still some debris at the bottom of the bowl. Stop pouring before you get to the bottom. Unpeg the clothes pegs and remove the filter cloth. You can see that there's quite a bit of dirt that we filtered out of this clean wax. For this step, you will need a pouring pot and a mold. I prefer using silicone soap molds. The silicone is really easy to pop the wax out from, and the small size makes it much easier to use that wax when you're doing body care products. But you can also use silicone muffin pans or small plastic containers. Alright, the wax is nice and hard now, and it's time to turn the wax block out. See how easy it is for that wax to pop out of the silicone. It's nice and clean, and I'm going to now have to store this in a plastic bag so that it doesn't pick up any little bits of dirt. Keeping your equipment clean is important, and I have a couple of tips I'd like to share. Okay, to clean your pots and bowls, you'll need hot water, your double boiler, some paper towel or newspaper. Make sure that you pour off any remaining hot wax into a garbage can or onto some newsprint. Then take a piece of paper towel and wipe out the remaining wax. This may take 2 or 3 pieces of paper towel to get it nice and clean. To clean your filter cloths, you'll need a pot, hot water, and laundry powder. We'll start by placing a pot of water on the stove and then adding laundry soap powder. Once the water is boiling, then we'll add our dirty filter cloths. The wax will melt quite quickly, and the soap water helps to break down the wax so that it doesn't stick to the cloths as we pull the cloths back out of the water. You can use this technique to wash wax spills off of tablecloths, tea towels, aprons, anything where the wax may have spattered. You can see that the filter cloth is nice and clean. It just needs a rinse in clean water just to wash the rest of the soap out. Thank you for joining us today. We hope that this video helps you produce better quality wax from your wax cappings.